Redwood Hills was, at first glance, a sleepy suburban enclave on the outskirts of a bustling American city. Each two-story home stood at neat attention along carefully paved roads lined with young maple trees. The houses boasted matching mailboxes, trimmed hedges, and identical white fences that gave the entire neighborhood a homogeneous, picture postcard quality. Anyone driving through would admire the uniform facades and blossoming flower beds, perhaps assuming Redwood Hills was the very model of peace and neighborly warmth. Yet, beneath the manicured lawns and symmetrical cul-de-sacs, subtle tensions simmered. A powerful homeowners association, HOA, governed Redwood Hills with a firm grip. In theory, the HOA existed to preserve property values and uphold aesthetic standards. In practice, it had grown notorious for imposing a staggering number of rules on everything from permissible paint colors to acceptable porch decorations. With board members who scrutinized each blade of grass, Redwood Hills felt at times more like a carefully policed environment than a carefree community. Among the more domineering voices on the HOA board was Belinda Abramson, whom many neighbors privately referred to as Karen. She was a middle-aged woman with an air of self-importance, known for her immaculate yard and sharp, hawkish gaze. Belinda rarely went anywhere without her trusty binder of neighborhood regulations. She seemed to relish in telling neighbors that they had 3 days to remove unsightly decorations, or that their hedges exceeded the maximum allowed height by half an inch. Most Redwood Hills residents knew better than to cross her. Some tried to placate her with polite greetings or half-hearted compliments about her roses. Others simply avoided her. But Belinda, Karen, had set her sights on being the community's arbiter, ensuring that everything conformed to her stringent idea of perfection. No one realized how far she was willing to go to enforce her will, until the day she targeted a disabled veteran named Sam Henderson. Sam Henderson was a quiet, unassuming man in his mid-40s. A decorated Army veteran, he had served in multiple overseas deployments. During his final tour, an IED blast severely injured him, resulting in a spinal cord injury that left him dependent on a wheelchair. Despite life's challenges, Sam radiated a gentle strength born from years of discipline and adversity. Sam had moved to Redwood Hills the previous fall, drawn by the promise of accessible sidewalks, step-free homes, and a friendly environment. He purchased a single-story house with a sturdy porch and a small ramp leading to the driveway. Features that, on paper, made Redwood Hills an appealing place for someone with limited mobility. Moreover, Sam hoped to live out his days in a community that appreciated veterans, where neighbors looked out for each other. At first, Redwood Hills seemed perfect. He'd often spend early mornings on his porch, sipping coffee as the sunrise illuminated the tree-lined streets. Occasionally, a passerby would wave, or a neighbor might chat about the weather. In a place as outwardly placid as Redwood Hills, Sam believed he'd found the stability and peace he needed to heal, both physically and emotionally. One of his first improvements to the home was installing an outdoor wheelchair lift on the porch, a small platform that rose or lowered at the push of a button, granting Sam easy access to the front door. While he could navigate certain ramps, he still struggled on steeper inclines, and inclement weather made even short distances arduous. The porch lift was a literal lifeline, ensuring that Sam could enter and exit his home without undue strain or risking a fall. Unbeknownst to Sam, Belinda, Karen, had taken notice of the new contraption almost immediately. While the lift was well within ADA compliance and the local building codes, she viewed it as an eyesore that disrupted Redwood Hills' harmonious aesthetic. In her mind, Sam's modifications were a breach of uniformity. She didn't care about the practicality or the empathy that mandated such an installation. She saw only the violation of her rigid notion of how Redwood Hills should look. The first time Karen approached Sam, she wore a polite smile that didn't reach her eyes. She saw him on his porch, finishing up an afternoon phone call. She stepped up, posture stiff, HOA binder tucked under her arm. "Hello," she said, eyeing the metal lift near Sam's front door. "I'm Belinda Abramson, on the Redwood Hills HOA board. I've been meaning to introduce myself and—" She paused, glancing meaningfully at the wheelchair lift. "I wanted to ask if you filled out the appropriate forms for that device." Sam, taken aback, blinked at her. "Forms? I'm pretty sure the lift is covered by the ADA regulations." I went through the standard city permitting process for installing it. The contractor assured me everything was in order. Karen gave a tight nod, her lips pinched. Yes, yes, city permits are one thing. But Redwood Hills has its own set of guidelines and aesthetic rules. We like to ensure any additions, ramps, lifts, or unusual structures blend seamlessly with the neighborhood's overall image. Her voice carried an edge of condescension. It's not that we don't support our veterans, she added, but we do want to keep Redwood Hills looking uniform. Sam felt a twinge of irritation. He forced himself to maintain calm. My contractor told me this was standard for wheelchair accessibility. I wasn't aware there was an additional form. If that's the case, please send it my way, and I'll fill it out. Karen's veneer of politeness thinned. I will, she said, tucking a strand of her impeccably styled hair behind her ear. In the meantime, I hope you understand that Redwood Hills prides itself on appearances. If the board finds the lift out of compliance, we may ask you to find an alternative. Perhaps a less obtrusive ramp design. Sam exhaled slowly. It wasn't the first time he had encountered a bureaucrat blind to the daily realities of physical disability. I'll be happy to cooperate, he said. But I need this lift. A ramp alone isn't always feasible for me, especially given the porch's height. I appreciate any help you can give to expedite the process. Karen's smile was so forced it looked painful. I'll be in touch, she promised, turning on her heel and marching back down his driveway. Sam watched her depart, an uneasy feeling in his gut. He'd hoped Redwood Hills would be a place of acceptance. Karen's rigid stance hinted that he might be in for a battle he never signed up for. Over the next few weeks, Sam received an official letter from the HOA stating that his outdoor lift may require additional approval. The language was vague, but the subtext was that the lift could be deemed an unsanctioned structure, if not formally granted an exception. The letter was signed by none other than Belinda Abramson. Sam responded with documentation from his contractor and the city's approval. He also included a personal note explaining that as a disabled veteran, this device was essential for his independent living. He believed that clarifying the matter would suffice. After all, how could anyone truly object to a piece of medical equipment that helped him navigate his daily life? But Redwood Hills HOA had a labyrinthine set of regulations, many shaped by Karen's own pedantic approach. The board deliberated for weeks, sending Sam requests for additional documents, photos from multiple angles, a blueprint of the porch, and an explanation of why a ramp couldn't replace the lift. Sam felt the tension mounting. He complied diligently, each request adding to a gnawing sense of frustration. A neighbor named Carol Watkins, who lived 2 houses down, caught wind of the ordeal. She happened to be a retired nurse who admired Sam's resilience. One afternoon, she ambled over to Sam's driveway, where he was checking the mail, and quietly offered her support. I've heard Belinda is making things difficult for you, Carol said, sympathy in her eyes. She's known for picking on anything she deems out of step. But please don't lose heart. A lot of us think your lift is perfectly fine, and we stand behind you. Sam offered a grateful smile. Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm just not sure why she's focusing on me. I'm not trying to break any rules. Carol shook her head. She likes to meddle. You're not alone in that. She once tried to find me because my rose bushes clashed with the recommended color palette. All you can do is stand your ground. If push comes to shove, the HOA board has other members who might side with you. The conversation cheered Sam slightly. He realized not everyone in Redwood Hills shared Karen's narrow-mindedness. Yet a sense of foreboding lingered, as if he were standing on the edge of a cliff, with Karen determined to push him over. As the weeks passed, whispers of Sam's predicament spread through Redwood Hills. While some residents shrugged it off, that's just Belinda being Belinda, others grew concerned. The spectacle of an HOA tangling with a veteran's essential medical accommodation struck many as unfair. Carol Watkins and a few like-minded neighbors began quietly rallying support, preparing to speak up at the next HOA meeting if necessary. Meanwhile, Karen's frustration simmered. Her attempt to strong-arm Sam through paperwork had not resulted in the immediate removal or modification of the lift. The broader board members seemed hesitant to declare the lift a violation, especially in light of its compliance with federal and state laws for disabled access. Karen vented her exasperation in private. He doesn't need 2 ways to get in and out of his home, she huffed to a friend over the phone. He already has a ramp. Why insist on that eyesore of a lift on the porch? It ruins the uniform appearance we work so hard to maintain. Her friend, less dogmatic, merely mumbled noncommittally in response. Karen hung up, further incensed that no one seemed to share her outrage. In her mind, Redwood Hills risked descending into a patchwork of special exceptions that would unravel the very fabric of conformity she cherished. She resolved to do something more direct if the board wouldn't. That same weekend, Sam was invited to a neighborhood barbecue hosted by a family 3 doors down. He attended, rolling across the backyard on a firm patch of grass. The warmth of the gathering heartened him, yet he could feel Karen's chilly stare from across the yard. She barely acknowledged him, turning away when he approached. Carol gave Sam a discreet, sympathetic pat on his shoulder. "She'll get over it someday," she whispered, but Sam wasn't so sure. One Tuesday evening, the HOA convened a special meeting to address Sam's lift once and for all. Karen arrived early, crisp blouse neatly tucked into slacks, her expression set in determination. She placed thick folders on the table, prepared to present a litany of reasons why the lift violated Redwood Hills' architectural standards. Other board members trickled in. Harriet Cole, a mild-mannered retiree who often tried to soften Karen's extremes. Mark Linton, a real estate agent who valued uniform aesthetics but also pragmatic solutions. And 2 other members who usually stayed neutral. A small crowd of residents sat in folding chairs against the walls, including Sam, Carol, and some sympathetic neighbors. At the appointed time, the meeting began. Karen took the floor, listing her grievances with the lift. Visibility. It was easily seen from the road, detracting from Redwood Hills' consistent look. Precedent. Allowing one large mechanical device could lead to others installing similarly unsanctioned items. Noise. The electric motor, Karen alleged, might disturb nearby homeowners, even though it was quite silent. Karen wound down her speech with feigned regret. "I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but Redwood Hills must protect the interests of all residents, not just one." Sam was then invited to speak. Wheeling to the front, he kept his voice steady. "My wheelchair lift is crucial for my independence. Ramps alone aren't always safe, especially in winter. This device is a medical necessity, and it's fully compliant with city code. If Redwood Hills prides itself on a welcoming environment, I believe we should also welcome neighbors who have different needs." A wave of quiet sympathy rippled across the room. Harriet cleared her throat, looking at Mark and the other board members. "Mr. Henderson has provided evidence of city compliance, and multiple neighbors have attested that the lift is not disruptive. Federal law does protect certain accommodations for persons with disabilities, so Redwood Hills is bound to respect that." Karen's eyes narrowed. "But Redwood Hills also has the authority." Mark Linton spoke up, cutting her off. "Karen, we can't override federal regulations. Even if we wanted to strictly maintain uniform exteriors, an accessibility device for a veteran is not something we can prohibit. Let's be reasonable." Reluctantly, the board voted. The final ruling upheld Sam's right to keep his porch lift, requiring only minimal decorative screening to blend it with the porch railing, something Sam was more than willing to do. Karen's face burned with frustration as Harriet announced the decision. She quickly gathered her folders, refusing to meet Sam's gaze. The neighbors in attendance erupted in quiet relief, and a few spontaneously applauded. Sam took a slow breath, feeling a heavy weight lift from his chest. He thanked the board members who had shown understanding. But in the back of his mind, he sensed that for Karen, this was not the end of the fight. It might only be the beginning. True to Sam's intuition, Karen did not rest. The board's decision was a stinging defeat, one that, in her mind, set a dangerous precedent. She fantasized that Redwood Hills would soon be overrun with special requests, overshadowing the uniformity she had spent years cultivating. She loathed feeling powerless, overshadowed by a single homeowner's personal needs. Late one night, she rummaged through her meticulously organized garage for some files and noticed a small padlock near her gardening tools. She held it between her fingers, a plan forming in the darker corners of her mind. She recalled that Sam's wheelchair lift was powered by a simple electrical connection from the house. Redwood Hills fuse boxes were often mounted in accessible outdoor areas, typically near the backside of each home. If she could somehow turn off the power to Sam's lift, even temporarily, Maybe he'd see it as unreliable or too much trouble to maintain. Her heart pounded. She knew it was an extreme idea. Tampering with someone's power supply was potentially dangerous. But she rationalized that the lift wasn't really necessary. He had a ramp, didn't he? She convinced herself that it was a small push, a subtle sabotage to teach him that Redwood Hills didn't need special modifications. The next day, she scouted Sam's property from a distance. Indeed, the circuit box was on the outer wall, a short distance behind a wooden gate. She noted that it was typically locked, but the older style of lock Redwood Hills used on many homes was easy to open if you had a small universal key. Karen was confident she could locate such a key. Over the years, she'd collected a surprising number of skeleton keys and passcodes for HOA emergencies. That evening, after most neighbors had turned off their porch lights, Karen crept out in dark clothing. She advanced toward Sam's yard, adrenaline surging. Under the cover of night, she flipped the latch on his backyard gate, a gate that was rarely locked, then navigated behind the shrubs. The fuse box stood there, a dull metal rectangle near the siding. She tested a small key, exhaling in satisfaction when the lock clicked open. Inside, a row of breakers. She scanned for the one labeled outdoor lift. A simple flick of her finger, and it was off. She relocked the box, scurried away like a thief in the night, nerves buzzing. In her twisted logic, she believed this was a victimless act, a minor inconvenience for Sam, who could surely rely on his ramp. But as it turned out, her meddling would unleash a far stronger backlash than she ever anticipated. The next morning was crisp and bright, dew sparkling on lawn edges. Sam awoke early, prepared for a doctor's appointment at the VA hospital across town. He wheeled himself to the front door, grabbed his bag, and pressed the button on the lift's control panel. To his confusion, nothing happened. The motor, usually humming softly, was silent. Concerned, Sam checked the control panel's power indicator. It was dead. He carefully pivoted his chair to see if any cables had come loose, but everything appeared normal. Resigned, he rolled down the porch ramp, which was steeper than recommended, but still manageable. He made a mental note to troubleshoot the lift when he returned. A few hours later, Sam came home, determined to fix the problem. He tried cycling the switches inside the house, tested the breaker panel he knew was located by the interior laundry room. Everything looked fine indoors, but the lift refused to budge. He phoned the lift's manufacturer, suspecting an internal fault. The technician guided him step by step, eventually suggesting, "Check your external breakers. Sometimes there's a dedicated circuit outside." Sam frowned, recalling that Redwood Hills had older-style breaker boxes near the back. He rarely accessed his because everything else was handled from inside. Maneuvering his chair around the side of the house, Sam found the small box, locked with a standard latch. The brand name was the same as the one Redwood Hills used on many homes from the 1990s. With some effort, Sam unhooked it. Indeed, there was a single breaker labeled lift. It was flipped to OFF. A surge of anger and puzzlement gripped him. Why would the breaker be turned off? He switched it back on, relocked the box, and returned to the porch. Sure enough, the lift powered up instantly, humming to life as the platform descended. At first, Sam considered the possibility of an electrical glitch or a random malfunction. But then he remembered the lock. He'd personally never opened that external box, so how had it gotten turned off? A nagging suspicion seated itself in his mind, and one name rose unbidden: Karen. Sam tried to shake off the suspicion. It seemed unthinkable that a neighbor, someone who lived steps away, would stoop to tampering with his power. He decided to install a small battery-powered camera near the porch, angled to capture any approach to the breaker box. If it was indeed a fluke, no harm done. If not, at least he'd have evidence. Days passed without incident. The lift worked normally, and Sam carried on, though he felt a simmering vigilance. Then, one Friday evening, Sam needed a last-minute grocery run. He returned in the early dusk to see the porch lift unresponsive again. Frowning, he hurried to check the newly placed camera. The footage, stored on a small SD card, showed something shocking. Belinda Abramson pushing open the gate with a gloved hand, a universal key, and flipping the switch. Sam's jaw dropped. She was wearing a baseball cap, but her face was unmistakable. She had forcibly turned off the power to his wheelchair lift once more. A wave of betrayal and anger washed over him. He felt violated, outraged that someone could trespass onto his property and sabotage a device integral to his well-being. Worse yet, it was the very person who had publicly opposed his lift. Sam immediately phoned Carol Watkins and Mark Linton, the more reasonable HOA board member, to let them know what he'd discovered. Word spread swiftly among neighbors. By the next morning, Redwood Hills was abuzz with the story of the security footage capturing Karen tampering with the fuse box. People were furious. This was no mere bureaucratic squabble over hedge heights or paint colors. This was a direct endangerment of a disabled veteran's safety. Even residents who once admired Karen's strict standards turned against her, appalled at the malicious lengths she had gone to. The blowback came fast and furious. Within hours of the footage circulating, the Redwood Hills social media group lit up with outraged posts. Some demanded Karen's immediate removal from the HOA board. Others threatened legal action, calling her sabotage a criminal act. One neighbor exclaimed, "I've had enough of her meddling. What she did to Sam is the last straw." HOA President Tom Whitaker, who often tried to maintain a low profile, found himself inundated with emails and phone calls. He convened an emergency board meeting for the following Monday evening to address the incident. Despite Redwood Hills' history of siding with Karen's zealous rule enforcement, there was no spinning or defending an act caught on camera. Mark Linton and Harriet Cole personally visited Sam, offering apologies and support. Harriet looked genuinely distressed. "I'm so sorry this happened," she said, her voice quavering. "That is not what Redwood Hills stands for." Sam, still shaken, nodded. "I appreciate it. I'm grateful most of the community is behind me, but I'm worried about retaliation. She clearly has no respect for my safety." Mark said firmly, "We're going to handle this properly. You have a right to press charges, Sam. At minimum, the HOA can fine her or remove her from the board. If you want to pursue a criminal case, we'll support you." Sam weighed his options. Filing a police report was definitely on the table. Flipping a breaker might seem minor, but if done repeatedly, it could trap him on the porch, or worse, cause harm if he had a medical emergency. "Let's see what the HOA decides on Monday," he said quietly, "and then I'll decide on whether to involve the authorities." Across Redwood Hills, the sense of shock and moral outrage grew. Some older veterans who lived in the neighborhood bristled at the insult done to a fellow serviceman. Younger families fumed at the idea that someone would endanger a neighbor for the sake of uniform aesthetics. Redwood Hills was on the verge of a communal reckoning. Monday evening arrived. A crowd gathered at the community clubhouse, more than double the usual turnout for HOA meetings. The tension in the air was palpable. Sam was there, parked in his chair near the front, flanked by Carol Watkins on one side and Harriet Cole on the other. Residents murmured among themselves, glancing occasionally toward the door where Karen might enter. Eventually, Karen walked in, flanked by no one. She held her head high, but her face was pale. She wore her signature crisp blouse and carried her binder, though it seemed more a shield now than a tool of authority. She took a seat at the long table, refusing to meet anyone's gaze. HOA President Tom Whitaker cleared his throat. "This emergency session is called to address serious allegations of property trespass and interference with a homeowner's medical equipment." A video was submitted showing Ms. Belinda Abramson, a member of this board, apparently shutting off power to Mr. Sam Henderson's wheelchair lift on 2 separate occasions. A hush fell over the room. Tom turned to Karen. "Ms. Abramson, do you have any explanation for your actions, which have been captured on video?" Karen's knuckles turned white as she gripped the edge of the table. Her voice trembled slightly. I was only checking a breaker because I thought there might be an electrical hazard. That lift draws a lot of power. I was concerned about a potential fire hazard." A wave of disbelief rippled through the audience. Sam's eyebrows shot up. Harriet's lip curled in disgust. Tom pressed on. "Ms. Abramson, the video shows you flipping the breaker off, not simply inspecting it. Furthermore, you have been on record as opposing Mr. Henderson's lift. Do you have any credible reason to have done so without his permission?" Karen's voice grew shrill. "This is a witch hunt. I try to do the right thing for Redwood Hills. He doesn't need special treatment. He already has a ramp. The lift is an ugly metal contraption that lowers property values. I wanted him to realize it wasn't necessary." A collective gasp rippled through the onlookers. Karen had just publicly admitted her stance. He doesn't need special treatment. It was a devastating condemnation of her own moral position. Anger flared in the crowd. One neighbor stood up, pointing a finger at Karen. "He's a war hero, and you left him stranded. Who do you think you are?" Tom hammered his gavel to restore order. "Ms. Abramson, your personal views on the lift are irrelevant. Tampering with his electrical supply is absolutely out of line, not to mention unethical and potentially illegal. The board has the authority to impose fines for endangering a neighbor and for unauthorized entry onto private property. Furthermore, Redwood Hills residents may choose to pursue legal recourse." Karen's face blanched. Her bravado faltered as the full weight of the consequences pressed down on her. She attempted to stammer out a defense, but the audience drowned her out with demands for accountability. For the first time in her reign of petty power, Belinda Karen Abramson was truly cornered. The meeting concluded with unanimous board agreement. Karen would be fined the maximum amount allowed under HOA rules for trespassing and endangering a homeowner's safety. If she failed to pay, further legal action would ensue. Additionally, the board mandated that she step down from any enforcement committees, effectively stripping her of the authority she once wielded so aggressively. A wave of relief and grim satisfaction swept through the crowd, though many still urged Sam to press criminal charges. Sam, emotionally spent, rolled out of the clubhouse to find dozens of neighbors waiting to greet him. Some patted him on the shoulder, others shook his hand or offered encouragement. The conversation quickly pivoted to ensuring that Karen would never have such power over Sam's lift again. Amid the hushed discussions, a neighbor named Nate Armstrong, no relation to Karen, ironically, revealed that he worked for a solar power supply company. "I can help wire your lift to a solar battery backup," Nate suggested. "That way, it won't rely on the main circuit that Karen has access to. Even if someone tries to flip the fuse, the lift will keep running." Sam lit up. "That sounds brilliant, actually. I never thought about a backup system." Nate nodded. "It'll be a bit of work to rig up a small panel and battery, but it'll keep you independent of sabotage. We can mount the panel on your rooftop or in a secure part of the yard where no one can tamper with it. And if we do it right, the cost might be offset by energy savings in the long run." Carol chimed in. "We can do a neighborhood fundraiser. I know plenty of folks who'd be happy to chip in to ensure Sam's safe. This can be our statement that Redwood Hills truly supports our veterans, regardless of what Karen might think." The idea caught fire immediately. Residents clamored with offers of help, from providing labor to donating materials. Harriet and Mark from the HOA board agreed to expedite any needed permissions, if Redwood Hills' own guidelines even applied. A new sense of unity filled the group, an eagerness to turn adversity into progress. Within a week, Nate Armstrong and a small crew of volunteer neighbors converged on Sam's property. Step by step, they installed a modest solar panel array on a section of Sam's rooftop that received ample sunlight. The wiring ran down into a locked enclosure that housed a compact lithium battery system. From there, they fed an independent line to the wheelchair lift's motor. Even if the main house power was shut off, the lift would continue to function, drawing energy from its dedicated battery. Sam watched in awe as the final connections were tested. The motor whirred to life on battery power alone, unaffected by the breaker switch inside or outside the house. Carol stood nearby, hands clasped with excitement. "This is amazing," she murmured. "Now, Karen can never trap you on your porch again." The official unveiling took place on a sunny afternoon. A small crowd of neighbors gathered in Sam's driveway. Harriet offered a brief speech, praising the community's determination and compassion. Mark declared that Redwood Hills' official stance was one of full support for Sam's right to accessibility, and that the board was rewriting certain guidelines to prevent any further tampering with essential medical devices. Sam, overwhelmed by gratitude, thanked them all. "I never wanted to stir up drama," he said, voice earnest. "I just needed a way to get in and out of my home safely. I can't thank you enough for everything you've done to help me." A spontaneous round of applause followed, punctuated by a few hoots of celebration. As if on cue, a gentle breeze ruffled the leaves overhead, sunlight glinting off the new solar panel. There was an unspoken acknowledgement that Redwood Hills had found a way to affirm its values: compassion, progress, and neighborly support, despite one person's cruel sabotage. For Belinda Abramson, the fallout was swift and unforgiving. The HOA fine amounted to several $1,000s, a hefty penalty for tampering with electrical equipment. Public opinion in Redwood Hills had turned decidedly against her. Even residents who once admired her strict adherence to codes now recoiled at her blatant disregard for a neighbor's welfare. Karen tried to defend herself in the Redwood Hills online forum, claiming she'd been unfairly singled out. But her posts garnered scathing replies. People demanded she issue a formal apology to Sam, something she stubbornly refused to do. Rumors circulated that she'd soon put her house on the market. If that was her plan, no one was certain. She became increasingly reclusive, seldom showing her face in communal spaces she once patrolled with righteous fervor. Meanwhile, Sam pressed forward with civil action, lodging a formal complaint with the local authorities. While the district attorney wasn't eager to pursue a felony charge for flipping a breaker switch, they did consider some form of misdemeanor offense. Mediation was proposed, with the aim of securing an admission of guilt and potential restitution. Karen never appeared for any preliminary meetings, fueling speculation that she might try to move away to avoid further consequences. Within Redwood Hills, the conversation about Karen evolved from anger to pity. In an attempt to dominate every detail, she had undone her own standing. The more she insisted Sam was at fault for wanting special treatment, the more she revealed her own cruelty and intolerance. In the months that followed, Redwood Hills entered what neighbors lightheartedly referred to as the post-Karen age. Freed from the overshadowing presence of an obsessively strict board member, the HOA made strides to strike a healthier balance between rules and neighborly kindness. Harriet and Mark steered the board towards simpler guidelines, focusing on safety and real community standards rather than minutiae about approved lawn ornaments or the exact shade of fence paint. Sam, for his part, found a new comfort in Redwood Hills. His solar-powered lift stood as a testament to the power of community solidarity. He even began hosting small gatherings on his porch, barbecues and potluck dinners, inviting neighbors to enjoy the very space that had been at the center of so much turmoil. Kids loved seeing the lift in action, and Sam would jokingly refer to it as his VIP elevator. During one such gathering, an elderly couple approached Sam. The husband was a Korean War veteran who used a walker. With eyes brimming with emotion, he praised Sam for standing up against Karen's tyranny. "You gave us the courage to speak up," the older man said. "For so long, we felt overshadowed by the HOA's demands. Now, Redwood Hills feels like it's truly ours again." Sam graciously accepted the sentiments. "I didn't do much," he insisted. "It was everyone who rallied around me." But the couple shook their heads, making it clear that Sam's humble stance didn't diminish what he had accomplished, simply by refusing to be bullied out of his rightful independence. Time marched on, and Redwood Hills continued to flourish. New residents moved in, charmed by the neat streets and quietly friendly atmosphere. The story of Karen's sabotage became local legend, retold in hushed tones, accompanied by head shakes of disbelief. Some neighbors suspected she might resurface in the area, but months turned into a year, and she remained conspicuously absent. Sam occasionally received updates from the local sheriff's office about the case. Karen, apparently, had relocated to another county. A warrant for questioning lingered, but she avoided returning to Redwood Hills. In her absence, Redwood Hills fully embraced the transformation that had begun after her downfall. Public areas grew more vibrant, with minor decorative variations becoming an accepted part of the neighborhood's tapestry. People recognized that uniformity did not necessarily translate to true community spirit. In a quiet, reflective moment, Sam realized that Karen's malicious act had inadvertently forged deeper bonds among neighbors. By threatening his independence, she galvanized Redwood Hills to stand up for the values it claimed to cherish: respect for veterans, empathy for the disabled, and a sense of collective responsibility. On the one-year anniversary of Redwood Hills' Liftgate scandal, as some jokingly called it, Sam decided to hold a small commemoration. He invited neighbors over for an informal gathering, served some snacks, and unveiled a newly installed plaque on his porch that read, "In gratitude to the Redwood Hills neighbors who showed that true community means lifting each other up." The plaque faced the wheelchair lift, a silent reminder of the ordeal they had all endured. Carol, Harriet, Mark, and countless others attended the gathering. They snapped photos, shared stories, and marveled at how much had changed in such a short span of time. Standing next to the plaque, Sam addressed the group. His voice was calm, his gratitude sincere. "When I came here, I thought Redwood Hills was just another suburban neighborhood," he said. "But I've learned that it's the people who make a place special, not the fences or the matching mailboxes. You all gave me a second chance at feeling at home. I'll never forget that." Applause rippled across the porch. Carol, tears gleaming in her eyes, approached Sam for a hug. Harriet offered him a handshake, though he pulled her in gently for an embrace as well. The sense of camaraderie and relief was palpable. Even a few new residents, who had only heard about the saga secondhand, found themselves moved by the resilience and unity that Redwood Hills had displayed. Several months later, while Sam was visiting the local VA hospital for a routine checkup, he had a chance encounter that sent an unexpected jolt through him. Wheeling down a corridor, he came face to face with Karen, Belinda Abramson herself. She wore plain clothes and looked uncharacteristically disheveled. The hostility that once crackled around her was replaced by a hint of uncertainty. For a tense moment, they locked eyes. Sam felt a surge of memories: the sabotage, the heartbreak, the solidarity of neighbors. Karen's gaze flicked downward. She mumbled a greeting. "Hello, Sam. I'm volunteering here now." She gestured to a small hospital badge clipped to her shirt. "Community service hours. Part of a plea deal, you might say." Sam measured his response carefully. "I see. I hope you're finding it fulfilling," he said, keeping his tone neutral. A swirl of conflicting emotions churned within him. He remembered the helplessness he'd felt when the lift wouldn't work, the anger of being sabotaged. But time had dulled the edges of that anger. He also recognized the guilt etched in Karen's posture. Karen attempted a weak smile. "I suppose I'm learning a lot about veterans. What you all go through. I didn't understand before." She couldn't quite meet his eyes. "I'm sorry, Sam. I really am." Sam gave a slow nod. "I appreciate that," he managed, voice low. He considered telling her she was forgiven, but the words didn't fully form. Some wounds ran deep, even though Redwood Hills had moved on. Still, Sam took no pleasure in seeing her so subdued. They parted ways, each lost in their own thoughts. For Sam, it was a strange closure. The woman who had once tried to deny his needs was now forced to confront the reality of caring for wounded veterans. Fate, or something like it, had delivered her a lesson in empathy, though whether she fully grasped it remained to be seen. Back at Redwood Hills, life continued peacefully. Sam's solar-powered lift was still going strong, unaffected by any tampering attempts. In fact, inspired by the success of his setup, several other neighbors explored solar solutions to reduce utility costs or power exterior lighting. The HOA found itself pleasantly surprised by the environmental benefits and overall sense of innovation. Harriet, who had become a strong advocate for more inclusive policies, worked with Mark and the rest of the board to sponsor a green initiative. This included streamlined approvals for solar panels, water-saving gardens, and other eco-friendly projects. Redwood Hills, once rigidly uniform, now evolved into a community proud of its progressive touches. Neighbors embraced the concept that respecting individuality, whether for accessibility or for environmental choices, could be a strength, not a weakness. Sam occasionally helped others research solar options, sharing what he'd learned from Nate's installation. He enjoyed the sense of purpose it gave him, knowing he was paying forward the support he had received. In many ways, Redwood Hills was blossoming into the welcoming place he'd originally hoped for, a neighborhood where the rules served the residents rather than the other way around. One crisp autumn day, a journalist from the local paper visited Redwood Hills to write a feature story about the neighborhood's transition. Interviewing various residents, she found a recurring theme: how a petty act of sabotage against a wheelchair lift had catalyzed Redwood Hills' transformation into a more caring, united community. She asked Sam for a direct quote regarding the ordeal. Smiling ruefully, Sam summed it up. "What started as an attempt to isolate me ended up bringing the entire community together. My hope is that Redwood Hills keeps building on that empathy, because that's what a neighborhood should be." The article garnered attention far beyond their suburb, prompting letters to the HOA praising Redwood Hills for rectifying the situation. Meanwhile, the final mention of Karen was that she had quietly sold her house and chosen not to return. For Redwood Hills, it was a footnote in the larger narrative of renewal. As the months turned into years, Redwood Hills continued on its path of quiet, steady growth. Families came and went, adding fresh perspectives to the community. The once feared HOA became a more balanced institution, focusing on genuine improvements like road maintenance, neighborhood watch programs, and inclusive community events. Neighbors formed new clubs, gardening groups, volunteer coalitions, and even a small, think a veteran committee that planned events in Sam's honor. Sam Henderson, increasingly comfortable with local life, enjoyed hosting friends on his porch, the wheelchair lift humming gently whenever he needed it. He maintained an active role in local veterans groups, inviting them to Redwood Hills to speak about accessibility and community support. Whenever a visitor marveled at his solar-powered lift, Sam recounted the improbable story of how Redwood Hills had rallied around him. Though he would never fully forget the distress Karen caused, Sam derived quiet pride from seeing that heartbreak transformed into something positive. Redwood Hills had embraced him, and in so doing, discovered a deeper sense of collective identity. The universal lesson resonated beyond one suburban street. When a single neighbor's needs are met with understanding, the entire community thrives. And so, Redwood Hills stood as a testimony to the power of unity. Where once a petty, tyrannical voice threatened to fracture the neighborhood, a single act of malicious sabotage ended up forging stronger bonds, reshaping the HOA's guiding principles. In that transformation lay the real triumph, a victory not just for Sam, but for everyone who called Redwood Hills home.